The problem with so much of our normative masculinity in our culture is its rigidity.
Dan Griffin discusses his work on trauma-informed curricula for fathers and mothers. He highlights societal resistance to recognizing men's trauma.
It's the rigidity that we cling to the rules because of shame, because of trauma. That's what causes the pain. Men don't necessarily take a deep look at gender conditioning, and so those man rules still drive a lot of the behavior, and so you get some of that really ugly, unhealthy stuff as well as some beautiful stuff, and it's all mixed together and it's just not as conscious. So then you move into conscious masculinity, and it's more this idea of like, hey, you know what? I like trying to do things on my own.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Dan Griffin. He's been in the field for a long time. He's written a number of books, really helping men learn what they didn't learn in school. You know, really giving us the leg up and helping us like catch up, I think, with a lot of the things that men I know struggle with when they feel like they have to adult or show up. He's written books on relationships, on fatherhood, on recovery, and his most recent book is A Man's Way Through Relationships. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. It feels a little weird to have my most recent book from 10 years ago, but that's okay. We've got some great publications that came out last year and this year that are more curricula. So they're not books, but we've written them for treatment programs and social services programs. And there's one for fathers. It's called Amazing Dads. It's the first trauma-informed curriculum for dads. And then this year coming out is Amazing Moms, and it's one of the first trauma-informed specifically for moms. And then last year also we had Healing Men's Pain, which was a curriculum for dealing with men's trauma. And then Healing Women's Pain is also coming out this year. So it's pretty fun. I didn't ever see myself doing any publications for women, but we found this amazing female author to kind of partner with and to create partner curricula for the two that we developed.
That's awesome. I want to talk to you about the curricula. So you mentioned you're in recovery. I'm also in recovery. I went through treatment centers and all that kind of stuff. I'm over 10 years sober. But I feel like a lot of it was like behind, so it's cool that you're updating all this curricula and releasing new things, because some of the programs I went for were like running shit from like the 70s and the 80s. So I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit about what it's like to kind of interact with the larger mental health treatment industry and what updates you're providing to them.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the mantra of my company is we teach you what you should have learned in school, because like I do some of my most popular talks. So I do like a lot of presentations at conferences, or I'll lead trainings and people bring me in to do trainings of their professional staff. And I've been doing it for a while and people are still like, oh my God, I've never heard this, or oh my God, why didn't I learn this in school? So I finally just started saying, all right, well, that's because we teach you what you should have learned in school. So it's not being institutionalized, but I don't know why, we're still kind of dragging our feet in some ways on these things. I'm a big believer in the 12 steps and 12-step philosophy. I'm a man in recovery. I've got 30 years this, past May. I still can't believe I have 30 years. Where did the time go? But I think we're starting to get there. But like when I first started doing my work, Mark, the idea of talking about men's trauma was like crazy. Like men didn't have trauma. Veterans had trauma, and women had trauma. And, and I would get that mentality at conferences. I mean, the people that came to hear me talk, they understood that men have trauma, but like there was still like this collective denial in our society. And there still is, in many ways. It's gotten much better, about how to address it. But I think the fundamental piece that's been missing, and this I'm sure aligns with your work as well, is really understanding men's unique needs and issues and creating services that speak to those, specifically from the perspective of gender conditioning and how it influences our lives from the before we're born all the way up until present tense. And, I'm a trained sociologist, I'm a systems thinker. And so that's kind of how I approach these things. And that's kind of the way that I look at it, is it's like, it's deep water in it. And if we don't see it, it greatly affects our sobriety. And so I would say untreated trauma is one of the big reasons for men's relapse. I would say unaddressed sexual, not just identity, but sexuality, and healthy sexual behavior is another huge connection to relapse. And a lot of that's connected to trauma. And then the other is just men not seeing gender conditioning and how much it dominates their consciousness and their lives.
I'm really excited by this conversation. I've been rapidly taking notes. There's a lot of different threads I want to pull on, but I want to start with something you said a little bit earlier, which is, just getting men into treatment, right? And saying how this industry can fail men in so many ways. And I see that, right? I think a lot of it can be female dominated. I think it can be like very soft, or guys can see it as patronizing or victim-y, and they just like really just ricochet off. And I don't need to tell you the stats. I know you know them, but I'll say it to our listeners, I think it's around like 28% of men receive treatment, while most of them have mental illness. Men commit suicide almost 4 times more than women, not to mention gun violence, not to mention, addiction. There's all these indicators that to me seem really obvious that men out there are really struggling and need mental health support. And yet, I think our industry doesn't take into consideration how to reach and access these guys. So I'm curious from your perspective, I guess, 1, how does it fail them? And 2, how can we reach these guys that really need some help out there?
Well, it's funny that you use the word fail, because there's a talk that I used to give. I haven't given it as much in a while, but I used to say, men are not failing treatment, we're failing them.
It's on us. It's on the industry.
Yeah. I mean, but we haven't accepted responsibility, and we still kind of use these individual sort of approaches and say, oh, well, that guy, I guess that guy didn't really want treatment, or that guy this and that guy that. And if you really understand gender conditioning, and if you really understand how men respond to trauma, I mean, here's like one of the critical concepts that I use that I think our field needs to reconcile. And it's what I call the male therapeutic dichotomy. And essentially what it is you have this concept, I call them the man rules, right? So people call them different things, the man box and this and the men's messages and all that. I just call them the man rules because rules is a very powerful concept. But so we have these man rules, right? So I'll just do it with you like the way I do it with an audience, right? From the moment you were a little boy, what are the rules you learned about what it means to be a real man?
Oh yeah, it's like don't cry, right?
Don't cry.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't be a pussy.
Like be strong, be courageous.
Be strong.
Yeah.
No weakness.
Yep.
Fix everything. Be a sexual Superman, right? Don't ask for help. Don't be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so think of that. Now that's in the water in which men are constantly swimming, right? That's in our consciousness. That creates so much of our identities. Then we come into treatment, therapy, whatever you want to describe. And then what are we asking men to do in those environments?
Break all the rules.
Break all the rules. Be vulnerable, ask for help, share your feelings, be weak, choose intimacy over sexuality, admit powerlessness, quote unquote, And I don't think we have ever fully reconciled the deep dissonance between those two things and created services with an awareness of them. So like every curriculum I've written, which is now 5, we include those dichotomies. And there's a dichotomy for women, which I actually wasn't sure, was there. And then our author, Dr. Sophia Murphy, kind of helped me see the dichotomy that women have. It's different. But for the 3 men's curriculum that I've written, we use that dichotomy. We try to expose that to men, but also to the people working with men, because it's a huge deal. Like if you really get that dichotomy, you would approach your services differently. You would approach men's behavior differently. You would understand trauma and men's trauma differently. And you would understand how to support men in the long term differently as well. So it really could call for a whole revolution in the way we do men's services systemically, which is what I've been trying to, foment, I guess you could say, for years. And we've had fits and starts, and made progress. For my work, I was invited to be a senior fellow at the Meadows, and served there for 2 years until my own trauma and my own mental health stuff just kind of blew things up, unfortunately. But it's the ultimate goal is that all the people that are in school right now would start learning this stuff. But if you look at the majority of schools, they still don't even differentiate services between men and women or other, gender identities. It's kind of wild.
It's kind of wild. Yeah, I was actually going to pull on that thread. Is like, I'm with you. I believe in gender separate programs, gender separate modalities. I think they are really different. But, I'm in Colorado and I went to, a very left leaning school, and it was very much like everyone's the same. Everyone's just a human. It was kind of a more hippie, way of looking at it. And I like that. I liked learning it. But when I came out into the world, I was like, oh no, this does not apply to the people that I'm working with, specifically the men that I'm working with.
It doesn't apply to men. It doesn't apply to women. And it doesn't even apply to our non-binary friends as well, who are trying to, they've probably got a better grasp on things because they're at least kind of seeing, through some of the BS. But no, a lot of therapy is feminized, not intentionally, but in my audiences, they're 60, 70% women. But the women love it and they want to support men and they want to do things differently, until maybe sometimes I start pointing the finger at them and asking them to kind of look at, well, so you've got the man rules, you've also got the woman rules, you've got your own gender conditioning. And of course, women have their gender conditioning around men and working with men and how to help men and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, are you willing to look at how much of that you bring into your relationships with men? I hear it from men all the time in couples counseling. Any couples counselor for heterosexual couples should have extensive training around gender conditioning and how to work with people, but they don't. And so some couples counselors are just complete shit, they have no real capacity for empathy for what's happening in the relationship. And
yeah. When a lot of them, like other men I talk to, feel ganged up in couples counseling because often 2 women, right? They're speaking a language that the guy doesn't really know or understand. He's trying to catch up, but he's already kind of 1 foot behind. And they're asking him to do stuff that he is like a novice at, and they're expecting him to be a master.
That's the key. That he's a novice at. I tell people all the time, I'm like, we're constantly beating men up for not being able to speak French fluently when they've been told French is a stupid language their whole life. That's really what we do.
Yeah, there's just so many times I talk to guys where it's like they said, there's a story of like a therapist demanding that they say a feeling, right? Like, tell me what you feel. It's got to be happy, sad, mad, glad, whatever, right? And the guy's like, I'm telling you how I feel. I'm telling you what I think. I'm explaining it. And it's like, so many therapists just beat the book on like the way it's supposed to look, instead of like listening to their client and being like, okay, maybe the guy didn't say he's angry, but I can tell he's angry. I'm not stupid. Like I can tell how he feels. I'm listening to him. I don't have to like fit him into this therapy box of what a perfect client should be and what they should sound like.
No, and it's, I mean, look, there's some, it's always a balance, right? Because there's some men who go into couples counseling and they're like, oh, I feel beat up. But if you really kind of dig into it a little bit more, all that's happening is they're being held accountable. All that's happening is their ego is being forced to drop from the idea that they have all the answers in the relationship and they're in charge. So like, I always try to get more information about what's happening. I've got a guy I was working with who started talking about his couples counseling, and so I wanted, he was talking about what a shitty experience it was, and I wanted more information. And then as he was talking, because my first thought was like, oh, you're a serial sex, having sex outside of your marriage, for years, and now you're having couples counselor and you're being held to account. So I'm like, that's probably what's going on. And then he started to describe more and more. I was like, oh no, your couples counselor is out of bounds. This is ridiculous. Like you're not being given a fair shake. And I have serious problems with what you're talking about. And so I think, it's just a conversation to help men feel comfortable and to help men feel like they're being heard. But a lot of men, they do need to be taken down a notch. Terry Real's work, I don't know if you're familiar with Terry Real, but How Can I Get Through to You? Probably one of the greatest couples books ever written. He talks about it. He talks about the systemic stuff. But I mean, he's like, a lot of guys come from the one-up position, and couples counseling and other counseling is just about trying to get them to be right-sized. And that hurts, A friend of mine, Alan Berger, who's written some really great stuff, especially on emotional sobriety, he says, the process of therapy for a lot of women is they're given something. They're given something back that's been taken from them. The problem for a lot of men in therapy is they're losing something, that they've had or that they thought has defined them. And so how do you get men to engage when the fear of that loss and that loss of identity is somewhere in their background?
I mean, that's the question. I mean, I got my answer, but I'm curious what you think about that. The way that we do it at Men's Therapy Online is we really frame it as like the hero's journey, right? If you look at a lot of marketing, it's all like Dungeons and Dragons, heavy metal type stuff, right? And it's like, you got to go into the underworld. You got to like burn, right? And burn off all this shit so you can come back stronger. And I think a lot of men do relate to that comeback story and that idea of shedding what's no longer serving them. I also frame it as, I think, like a man as compared to a boy wants feedback and thrives on feedback and thrives on honest feedback, and I think kind of to your point is like a lot of us don't get honest feedback, whether because of that power dynamic or privilege or ego defenses or whatever, right? Like we don't get honest feedback, but I think like a real man wants to know if he's doing well, what's working, what's not working, what his strengths and weaknesses are so that he can then improve. And I think once a guy like can hook onto that, they're like, okay, this is for my own good, right? This is for improvement. It's not just to get beat up or a pity party or whatever. Like I'm going to take this feedback in, I'm going to refine who I am and grow.
Yeah. And I think, I like that. And it makes sense because, I think you gotta meet men where they're at, right? Because there's a lot of guys, they are in the one-up position, and so they need a certain approach. There's a lot of guys, though, they come in the one-down position, and they don't need that same approach, and it's not going to work for them. And that's been one of the challenges too, is that people used to think men's therapy was always about breaking men down and having to, whatever, get them. And for some guys, again, they need that. They can't touch the pain they're in until they stop with the arrogance and the power plays and all of that sort of stuff. But then there's some guys who, like, the nice guys, quote unquote, who they just take it all out on themselves. Like, they're good guys to a lot of people, and then they will just destroy themselves. Well, you can't approach that guy the same way you would approach, a guy who needs a slightly different approach. I love motivational interviewing in that regard, because I think that the tools from motivational interviewing really can capture where any man's at and kind of help you to see. But when you have because I was just talking to a guy, and he's clearly a guy who really just has a lot of self-loathing, right? And I was talking to him, and I said, but we were talking about not asking for help, and we're talking about like the arrogance of that, and we were talking about, and so there were still elements, even though he kind of has this internal self-loathing, there were elements of that other stuff, that kind of one-up stuff. But the element, I think, is just the gender conditioning, because he's like, he said, asking for help is not a strength. I said, of course it's not. It's not a strength for almost any man anywhere, because we've been conditioned since we were very young to not ask for help. So if it's hard for you, that makes sense. If because it's hard for you, you don't try it and do it.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. That's kind of keeping yourself down. I want to talk more about the nice guy thing. And for our listeners, I interviewed Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote the book on Nice Guy, on the show, so you can go and look at that. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to dig into this deeper. But Dan, I'm curious because I see it a lot. I see it a lot in my generation, the millennial generation. I see it a lot in, Gen Z. And I think it's a lot of these guys who looked at the older generations, Gen X and Boomers, and they're like, I'm not going to be that, right? So they became the opposite, but they didn't really have their own two legs to stand on. I think also a lot of my generation were called the divorce generation, right? Like over 50% of us were raised in divorced families, which is wild to even think about. So a lot of us were raised without a father. And also we're told that being a man was bad, right? We have a hurt mom, right, who went through a divorce that is kind of telling us these stories of all the horrible things our dad did. So we have this generation of like anti-men. So I'm curious if you see that out there, and how do you?
I totally see it, and it's really interesting because I do the man rules exercise all the time, and then that's one of the first things is you have these guys who are like, oh, but that's not me. Yeah, I'm like, well, I would encourage you to look at the ways that you do follow these rules rather than immediately saying they don't apply to you, because everybody's in the water, and everybody's affected by what's in the water, right? And the man rules are a big kind of toxin in a lot of ways that's in the water. I mean, it's not all bad. There's a lot of great things about being a man, obviously. If you can really consciously choose the man you want to be and you're not following some script. But so I talk about that with guys. I talk about that with therapists, who are saying like, oh, these aren't my guys. And I'm like, well, they are your guys, because that's why when you ask them, what are the man rules, whether they're 16, 36, or 66, they're going to give you the exact same man rules every single time. So then the question is, how do they show up in your life? And for the Gen Xers like me, the boomers, it was a lot more pronounced. And for actually, frankly, I mean, I've seen a lot of Gen Zs and a lot of millennials who are just totally hyper masculine and all into it. So there's like there's pockets, like there's these different groups, and like there's the guys that have just totally continued to reinforce traditional masculinity, and then there's the groups like you're talking about that are like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
But what they didn't do, right? There's no core. There's no core. They didn't choose. Like there's that great line, what you resist persists, right? So if you're going to just not be something, then that is what still holds the power in your life. And that's what's happening to a lot of these guys is they're angrier than they realize. They're meaner than they realize. They're more, they use power and control more than they realize. They're more privileged and entitled, especially entitled, than they realize. Because as soon as you say, that doesn't apply to me, then you stop looking. There's no curiosity. There's no inquiry. And so you don't gain. And so that's why I talk about this concept, conscious masculinity, is that you're really consciously choosing the man you want to be. Whatever generation you are, wherever you come from, you consciously choose the man you want to be, not the man you don't want to be. And there's a very, very big difference between moving into something you want to be in an affirmative as opposed to that you don't want to be.
Yeah. Amen, brother. I mean, let's talk more about that, right? Because it's like, yeah, like the toxic masculinity, if you want to call it that. I don't love that term, but
I don't use that term, frankly.
Traditional, whatever, right? Like that.
But I do say, and I learned this from a guy named, I'm blanking on his name, but he differentiated, and I like this because for me, this is what works. Instead of toxic masculinity, you call it the toxic culture of masculinity. And I can get behind that.
I like that. Yeah. So, right. Toxic culture of masculinity. I think that was like anti-feminine, right? Didn't have a core of just anti-feminine. And then nice guy, which is what I was, right? Until I did a lot of my therapy journey, was anti-toxic culture, right? So again, no core. So I want to talk a lot more with you about that conscious masculinity and that core, because I think that's really what's lacking. So yeah, just say more about that, how you help guys build that, what that looks like, because it's such a proactive versus reactive way to define yourself.
Yeah. So for the longest time, and I still think it's the right way to do it, but I just noticed like guys tend to want or need a lot of direction, early on. But I've really been reluctant to define it. Like to say, oh, a conscious man loves women. A conscious man loves himself. A conscious man knows how to ask for help. A conscious man walks, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. I've gone back and forth, and I think what I've landed on is it's kind of like, here are all the ingredients for conscious masculinity that I can think of, and then you choose the ones that really resonate with you. But I've been very reluctant to define it because that's what men get our whole lives, is we're this predefined identity that a man is this, and a man is this, and this is what a man has to be. And, and just that idea of like the man card and how easily we can lose, our standing as men. I mean, that's all based on that idea of like some narrow prescription of masculinity. And so with conscious masculinity, I've just wanted to move as far away from that as possible. But in doing so, I maybe have left some of the folks, who follow my work and kind of do this work with me and all that stuff without enough direction. Like I might have gone too far because I think people appreciate like some guidance when it's not something that, they've necessarily thought a lot about. And so like for me, I say conscious masculinity is driven by enlightened choice, right? And so what does that mean, Mark? Well, let's go back to the rules, right? Is it like, is don't cry a bad rule?
Not inherently, right?
Not inherently, right? Is don't ask for help a bad rule? Depends, right? So it's all depends, right? The problem with so much of our normative masculinity in our culture is its rigidity, not its substance. It's the degree to which a guy thinks, I can't ask for help. I'm on my knees. I'm about to lose my marriage. I am drinking myself to death. I am about to get fired. And I still will not ask for help because I don't want to look weak. I got to figure this out for myself. And then I blow my head off. You know, I mean, like when so it's the rigidity that we cling to the rules because of shame, because of trauma. That's what causes the problems. That's what causes the pain. And so in conscious masculinity, I love this term of like, in conscious masculinity, in my master's research many years ago, I interviewed men in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I came up with a term before conscious masculinity, and it was called relaxed masculinity. And I said, that's what seems to happen in the 12-step culture, is men just kind of have this relaxed kind of sense of masculinity. The problem is in 12-step culture, men don't necessarily take a deep look at gender conditioning. And so those man rules still drive a lot of the behavior. And so you get some of that really ugly, unhealthy stuff, as well as some beautiful stuff. And it's all mixed together, and it's just not as conscious. So then you move into conscious masculinity, and it's more this idea of like, hey, you know what? I like trying to do things on my own, and I have the ability to ask for help when I need it, and I don't let that voice of shame telling me I got to figure this out for myself or I'm a fucking idiot, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't let that prevent me from doing that, you know? I know how to be vulnerable. I've also learned that my vulnerability is really is something to be very proud of and sacred. And so I don't need to share it with everybody. And in fact, not everybody deserves it, is something that Brene Brown talks about. So it's like, the more intentional we are about who we are as men, I think the more it aligns with our spirit and like who we were supposed to be on this earth.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, man. Like, there's a lot of stuff I like, and now I'll pull out a couple. I like the enlightened idea, right? The idea of mindfulness, right? Because like you said, it's like, it's consistent but not rigid, right? You have these values, but you need to know when to apply them. And it does take a level, I think, of like mindfulness and awareness and skill, truly, right? To know when to apply what side of the rule. You know, but what we do at Men's Therapy Online is we talk about honor codes. And the one that I hold and on behalf of our company is strength, courage, mastery, and honor, right? But when I work with my guys, similar to you, I'm like, I don't care what your honor code is, really, but you need to have one. Like, I want to know what your values are. I want to know what you're going to fight for. I want to know what's really important to you. Because for me, that's the masculine core, is like things that are tested by fire, right? Things that are tested in life of like, okay, you know, I value honesty. This sucks, but I'm going to be honest anyway, right? Or I value courage. I know I'm a little bit afraid right now, but like, I'm going to step up and do the hard thing. You know, having that kind of like honor code, I think, is deeply masculine. If you look at, you know, the army or samurai or the Knights of the Round Table or the Bible, right? Like there's a code in all of those things. I think it's like I think men like rules, but rules that kind of what you're saying, that they define themselves and that are more aspirations and less prescriptive.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I think, you know, it's interesting. In the years that I've been doing this, and I've worked with a lot of women, read a lot of women's stuff and all that stuff, and David Data and MKP and all that stuff. And I feel like there's kind of like a balance, right? The balance is the degree to which I support men in finding their best selves, and the degree to which I continue to reify a masculine feminine narrative that may or may not exist. What I mean by that is, I forget who it was that said this, but it's like, the more people do their work and figure out who they are, the less it seems to matter about whether you're a man or a woman, and the less frankly, those kind of stereotypical narratives seem to apply. So it's almost like the more you can shed the conditioning and really discover who you are, then you really figure out like kind of what fits, and you figure out that men and women are more alike than different. And I believe that. Now, I know that is not the most common sentiment, and there's a lot of people who make a lot of money off of reinforcing the fact that men and women are not. Now, that said, I said more alike than different. We're still different, but just as a certain thing doesn't apply for a man, it might not apply for a woman, or something that we think is like so common for men actually is really common for certain women. And the less we kind of reinforce this binary, I think false binary, and give people permission to just have their authentic experience, I think there are tons of women who love so much of what we consider quote unquote masculine. And frankly, like there's tons of men who love so much of what we consider to be feminine. And it's just like, can you have permission to just be you outside of the conditioning? We're far from that as a society. And so we're far from that from most people giving them permission to do that and to be that. But I think it's getting better. And I think it's a balance, and I think it's a kind of both and. It's like reinforcing and building up like a sense of who I am as a man, while at the same time moving away from a strict kind of us and them or whatever.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think the only thing I would add is I think it's developmental, which I think you're also saying too, of like, I had a spiritual teacher that basically said you have to develop an ego before you can lose it. And I think that's kind of the thing is like, I think a lot of these lost guys, and again, I work more with the nice guys, like they need to lean into the masculine ideals, build those first, and then they can shed it. And I study a lot of like religion and mythology, and the end point of a lot of these stories is this like hermaphrodite figure or this union figure, right? Like this idea of a fully integrated, like masculine and feminine. And I agree with you. I think that's like the apex.
Yeah.
But I do think guys need to play with masculinity first before they can let it go.
Totally agree. And that's the both and, right? That's the both and that I'm referring to. I mean, it's like the guys that I see sometimes who are still this is something that I am currently navigating and trying to make sense of. I've got people I know in my 12-step community. They sound awesome in meetings, and they work with tons of guys. And then they rattle off the most sexist comments, and they rattle off some of the worst sexual behavior, and they say the worst things about women, and they sometimes homophobic stuff, and sometimes even racist stuff. I mean, like just stuff where I'm just kind of like, and I'm like, how do you reconcile that? How are you able to reconcile that? Is it because nobody's calling you out? Is it because it works for you? And then I have to like think like, and how does it work for me? Like, do I want to be around those guys? Do they lose standing, so to speak, at least with me, because I love their message, and I actually see the way that they show up in a lot of areas of their lives. It's just beautiful, right? And then there's that 10% that's just totally shitty.
Yeah, it's the shadow work.
It is. It's the shadow, because a lot of these guys have been what? They've been hurt by women.
Exactly.
And they just don't want to own it, They don't want to own it.
Yeah, they're powerful as a speaker, but then it's like, oh yeah, there's still like that hurt part that's not healed. And again, I think it's developmental, right? It's great that they're sober. It's great that they're helping other guys. It doesn't minimize any of that. But the next level is like, okay, now you got to look at that shadow. You got to look at that like hurt part that you locked away in the closet and figure out what its deal is.
And I think there's a lot of that in the 12-step community. And I think part of it is because, and this goes back to treatment, because we don't talk about this stuff with guys in treatment. I mean, if you look at my books, it's in all my books. It's in all of my treatment curricula, because I know how important it was to me. And I was very fortunate, or some might say unfortunate, that I got like a heavy dose of this stuff in sociology, because I took a sociology of women course at the same time that I got sober. And so I kind of got the treatment, quote unquote, that I think every man should get. When you sit, as a man, if you are not forced, but if you have the privilege, is really what I should say, have the privilege to sit in a room of 40 women, and only 2 men were in the class, sociology of women, me, straight guy, and this other guy, gay guy, all the rest women. And when you have the privilege to sit in that group and hear their stories of rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse, how they've been treated and lived in the shadow of their brothers, of how, all kinds of stuff. It was over 30 years ago that I had this experience. If you have the opportunity and the privilege to sit in that room, it'd be hard to turn around and continue to use misogynistic language and not be willing to do the work. I mean, I've had some real issues with women, and I've struggled with really violent behavior, and really causing harm. And that was my shadow stuff and the work that I needed to do, around my mom and my own abuse and trauma. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do that work. It saddens me that the 12-step community isn't more proactively, countering those messages.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was in 12-step for 4 years and then left because I went to therapy and I went to men's groups. But I need that, kind of that deeper level. It was incredible for getting me sober, saved my life. And then I was like, oh, wait, but I have trauma that I need to really work on. I have misogyny, I have insecurities that 12-step I don't think is designed to work on. It's kind of it's really good at what it does, but it doesn't go too much beyond that.
I think it is designed to work on it. I think it's 100% designed to work on it. It doesn't currently work on it. There's absolutely, if you work with me in the 12-step community and you're my sponsee and you're doing a 4-step, you bet you're going to take a look at misogyny and objectification of women and pornography and that kind of stuff. Now, we don't always include that. It's not across the board, but I believe the 12 steps are 100% designed to respond to all of that. But we just don't bring it there. I don't say that to mean the 12 steps can heal everything. I don't believe they can. I think it's a both and. For me, I've done trauma work and men's work outside, and I've remained a part of the 12-step community. That's been my choice. And I'm grateful for that. And so I guess my point is, I look forward to the day when the 12-step community, especially the men's 12-step communities, really have a different core mentality. Now, I'm in West LA, and we're kind of a little bit of an anomaly for some other meetings around the country. A lot of what you're talking about gets talked about at our meetings. It's not the stuff that I'm talking about that's missing it's still there, but there's also some really beautiful stuff, about how we talk about women, talk about fathers, talk about kids, and the kind of deeper stuff, the emotional sobriety.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I got sober in Pittsburgh, so it was a very different.
Yeah, I got sober in Stanton, Virginia. I mean,
Yeah, I imagine California is much more expansive. But I want to talk about these issues directly, and you've inspired me to take a look at some of your books. Like, how do you talk about these things like misogyny, right? Like homophobia, things you're naming, sexuality, violence. Yeah, because I think a lot of therapists are afraid.
Yeah, because the problem with, okay, I shouldn't say the problem, it's very judgmental, but I think the challenge is, how do you get men to hear this? And you can beat them over the head. I mean, maybe you've heard of a guy named Paul Keevil, his stuff is great, but it's intense and it's like so in your face. It's going to turn so many guys off. So what we do is we introduce it in a subtle way in the curriculum or in my books. And then we say, hey, and if this resonates with you, check out this work, right? But I think it needs to be gentle, because it's so easy for men to get defensive, to feel shame around it and their behavior. And, and then these days, because of the rhetoric, right? Anybody who says anything that talks about men's privilege can immediately get a response from a guy who's like, privilege? I don't got no privilege, blah, blah, blah. And it's like an immediately defensive response. Is like, hey, you know what? That's fair. Like, one, motivational interviewing, and two, like both and. Like, the truth is, you can grow up. I mean, Theo Von actually does a really funny little stand-up about privilege. And he's like, so how do I have privilege? I can't do it. It's funny though, because he talks about this black guy who was his neighbor, and about him, and he was like hearing about like all the privilege that he had as a white guy, and there was something about like somebody's, I don't know, I can't do it justice, but look for it, for your viewers. I mean, look for it. It's funny. I mean, Theo Von is, he's kind of all over the place as far as consistent message in some ways, but he's reaching a lot of guys, and he knows that there's a lot of young guys hurting, and he really wants to help those young guys. But then the next step, right, is that like part of the reason why guys we have so much suffering and so much pain and isolation is because we've bought into the lies that our culture has taught us about masculinity. And one of the biggest lies that men have been taught is that we're special. And when the world doesn't treat us as special, we get hurt. But actually, the world is just being itself. And like, how many guys that you've worked with, even with the nice guys, they have to grieve the idea that they're not special, that entitlement. And it's like, you're grieving something you actually never had. You're grieving the loss of something you don't deserve. That's one of the lies of masculinity. I fell for it. Luckily, I had have a wife, 21 years, who is like, are you kidding me? That's what I love. I love having a strong woman in my life who doesn't take my shit. And at the same time, who has the humility to apologize and own her stuff. And, it's a blessing, because I know guys in marriages for 20 years who are waiting for their wives to apologize. And something about it, about women's conditioning, that's not happening. But, I believe we need to talk about these things. We need men to take a look at these things, but not in a way that just points a finger at them and blames them. I always just say, hey man, this is a part of the conditioning. This is part of the messages you took in from a very early age. And I just want you to know, you come by it honestly, but you have a choice. You have a choice. And if you think you can maintain this idea of privilege or these misogynistic views of women or the objectifying of women, if you think you can maintain those and find a loving, intimate relationship, you are fooling yourself. It will never happen. They are 100% incompatible. And you can find a partner, but that doesn't mean you'll find the connection until you do that work.
Yeah, it'll be a relationship based on like power and control.
Yeah, it's just doomed for failure. I mean, there's some women who are like, oh yeah, I mean, women are just as vocal these days about putting, you know, like if they were listening to our conversation, yeah, like there's some women be like, oh, those guys are a bunch of pussies.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's ubiquitous. Yeah, it's across the whole culture.
Because again, it's this water, right? We're all in the water. We're all swimming in the water, and women internalize that stuff too. And it's kind of like, well, okay, if a guy's not showing up the way I think he needs to show up, the way I've been told guys show up, and then I show up the way I've been told I need to show up. If he doesn't show up that way, then I have to look at myself and the way I've been told to show up and all the conditioning that I've had. So if I have to look at him, then I'm going to have to look at myself. So if both players aren't playing their role, you know, as soon as one player starts playing a different role, the other one has to look differently at their role. And that's what women are reacting to. And man, I can't tell you how many men I've talked to over the years, especially the last 10, who are in so much pain because they are so confused about what women want.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
They are so confused about how to show up. They are so confused about what's going to get them in the friend zone and what's going to, you know, and it's like, I try to treat them with respect. I try to be, you know, loving and open and intimate, and they seem to lose interest. So I just have sex with them, and then I don't go back, you know, and it's almost like the women's behavior pushes them a little bit into that, back into that box of unhealthy masculinity. And they're just like, what? I don't understand. Like, women keep saying they want emotional guys, and I keep hearing these stupid ass podcasts out there saying how there's no emotionally aware, you know, men out there, and that's why women are so unhappy. And hello, you know, we've got tons and tons of men who are ready to show up and be vulnerable and open and honest and responsible and accountable, and women are not seeming to resonate with those men.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think it takes both. I mean, so many of my guys, right? The story is like over 50%, right? Like they come to therapy because their wife basically has an ultimatum, right? Like, do therapy or I'm going to divorce you, right? And they come, they do a good 1, 2, maybe 3 years of work. They come back, they're like emotionally intelligent, they have the conversations, they're doing all the shit, right? And then they leave their wife because the wife often doesn't like join them, right? It's often like an ultimatum, but just like you said, if you change this one person in the system, you have to change both. I think the system goes towards that homeostasis point. So you have this woman who I think in all good intentions, like wanted their guy to be more emotional, but then wasn't ready for kind of like the ripple effect of what that would mean for her and for her family and for the roles.
I will say that one of the things I've also noticed is that in situations like that, guys give themselves permission to leave a lot quicker than I certainly would suggest. You know, like if I were working with them or whatever, I mean, it's like, hey, whoa. You've been a shitbag for 15 years. Now you're doing great, supposedly, for 6 months, and you're ready to end the marriage? Okay, for a year, and you're ready to 2 years, and you're ready to end the marriage? Really? Like, really? And part of that is because, I mean, I've been through ups and downs in my marriage, and like I think we're better than we've ever been. And like I was just telling my wife the other night, we do these weekly meetings, and we just check in. You know, we just kind of check in what's going on with us. And I said to her, I said, you know, we've been married 20 years, but if we're lucky, you know, we could have another 20 or 30 years. And I'm just ready to like really see how good that can be, you know, and how great that can be. And hopefully we can let go of, you know, some of the past. And so I'm all for people ending marriage when it needs to happen. I think a lot of younger generations in particular have not been coached on how to hang in there. And so they're ending marriages way too easily. And guess what? They find somebody else and they get the exact same issue. It's the same shit, right? Oh, you thought you had done all your work in 6 months? Think again. You know, and at the same time, Mark, I'll be honest with you, a lot of friends in the exact situation you're talking about, and they did leave the marriage after a year, 2 years, whatever, and have found amazing partners. You know, so it's never black and white, you know?
Yeah, it's never black and white. And I think it's like, I think it's like the unity that's important, right? Because I think we're talking about this conscious masculinity, right? It's like you develop a value system and then you're like, okay, I want my partner to have a similar or at least compatible value system. And I know that takes time, but I do think at some point, some values can be pretty incompatible. And it could be blindsiding for the female partner, right? Or the other male partner, whatever their, sexuality is, of like, oh, the person that you married is not the person that's coming out of therapy now, right? Like this person now has values. They care about stuff. They're willing to fight for stuff. They're willing to be open, honest about things that maybe they never talked to you about. So it feels like a big reveal or a big secret. Like, I guess the reason I'm saying that is for the listeners out there is that therapy can be really turbulent. I think it's ultimately healing, but it can be really disruptive. And I think good therapy is disruptive because it really does make you question everything. It should, right? So that you can then choose what you want to take and what you want to leave behind.
I was just going to say that exact same thing. Good therapy should be disruptive. Yeah, I totally agree. And, navigating this stuff is hard. And waking up, is hard. And my experience is what happens after you wake up again. And you wake up again and you keep waking up. I mean, and it's kind of like, after 30 years of sobriety and a lot of personal work, I'm amazed at the work I have left to do. I mean, about all of the, the growth I've had, but all the work I have left to do. And that's part of the joy, that really is part of the joy. So, for all your listeners who I'm going to assume are mostly men, I just say, it's so worth the work. It's so worth it to not do this by yourself. It's so worth it to get that kind of positive disruption. Like that disruption that leads to your best self. There's a great line in Buddhism, that says, no mud, no lotus. And what that is referring to is the lotus flower that grows out of the mud. But the idea is just like, man, you got to get in the mud to get to what's beautiful. And our society, America the Great, loves the sheen. We love the surface. We love it when people can just get along without any real substantive intimacy or conflict. The people who are like, oh yes, I love my partner so much. We never argue and we never fight. And I'm like, oof, I will not be coming over to spend time with you. Because a healthy conflict is the cornerstone of intimacy. It's not like somewhere maybe, it's the cornerstone, a healthy, because you have two people with two different minds and experiences and personalities who are navigating how to get along and how to do things. And everybody has to have a voice. And finding that voice is an amazing journey, dude. Finding that true voice where you can speak up, where you can be strong. Like you're talking about like a healthy core masculinity. I know I'm willing to protect my wife and my daughter no matter what. I know I would give my life for them. And I know there's other causes I would probably give my life for. And then there's the metaphorical giving of my life, of just like committed and disciplined and what I'm willing to do. But like, I feel like it's taken me a long time, but I found a lot of my voice. And I think when I first started doing this work, I hadn't really found my voice. And I was so insecure. And I was so riddled with imposter syndrome that I'd come across as arrogant. I'd come across as defiant. I'd come across as defensive. I'd come across as reactive. And now I just feel so much more relaxed about it, but yet even more committed and confident at the same time. And I share that not to make it about me. I share that for your listeners who are like that's the benefit of the work, man. That's the benefit of the work, is that you can stand on your own 2 feet, comfortable in your skin, with your own voice, creating an amazing life. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah, that's it. Bravo. Yeah, I think that's where we end the show. I think that was really well said.
That was my concluding speech.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful North Star for our listeners out there to aim towards, right? And a big shot of motivation. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn more about you if they want to follow your work or buy your books or check out your talks?
Yes. So thanks for having me. This has been a fun conversation. It's so needed. While we're redoing my website, you can still see my current website, www.dangriffin.com. And basically everything you need, you can contact me through the website. You can see my books. You can see my trainings and all the different things that I do. I try to make it really easy for people. And then you can also sign up for my newsletter that I only send once a month because I don't want to bother people.
Awesome. Yeah, and all that will be in the show notes. Quick note to our listeners, we've had people ask, what are the show notes? They are the description on all your podcast apps. So no matter where you're listening to this, if you click on the description, it'll be right there. You don't have to sign up for anything extra. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. So it's right there. So yeah, check out all that stuff. Really enjoyed the conversation with you, Dan. And for listeners, please check us out. Also, we're at menstherapy.online. That's the healing hub for men. We got everything. We got courses, we got books, we got podcasts, we got book club, we got whatever you want. So check that out, menstherapy.online. And we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.